The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, a Hoop Ball presentation. I am Dan Besbris, your sometimes gracious host. We'll get this thing rolling. Coming off a medium-sized Monday, I should say. So we get things kicked off here on the podcast. We've got an excellent slate. We'll break down the big Monday storylines, recap anything interesting that happened. I went on a trade-blasting extravaganza yesterday. It's time, man. This is the time of year. Start making those adjustments before the other people in your league. But I'll do my own little soapbox rant on that later on in the show. We're going to talk to Chris Iseman, who covers the New York Knicks. That's right. We've got an inside look at the Knickerbockers. He's their beat writer over at The Record and NorthJersey.com. Great interview where we actually talk about basically everybody on the team in 15 minutes. Jam that sucker in, man. We got Mitchell Robinson chatter. We got Enes Kanter chatter. We've got Kevin Knox chatter. Courtney Lee chatter even makes the cut. Yes, that's right. Even Courtney Lee. Emmanuel Mudiay, Frank Ntilikina, Mario Hezonja. The list goes on. And yes, even the mighty Noah Vonleh, who's actually been very good lately. Mudiay's actually been okay lately, too, and surprise twist out of New York. But, of course, the uncertainty is why we need to figure out what's going on with the Knicks, and Chris is going to help us because he gets to hear what David Fizdale says on a daily basis. The rest of us either don't have access or the time to figure out every single quote. There's nuance. There's stuff between the lines, and Chris is going to fill us in on all of that. We're going to profile the 5-game Tuesday card to wrap up the show, and then we'll get you situated for tomorrow. First things first, though, and that is the Monday card. 7 games on Monday, but we did end up learning a decent amount, and so I want to give each of these situations its due time. Game number 1 that we were paying very close attention to was Minnesota and Cleveland to see what's going on with Taj Gibson and Dario Saric. Taj won the minute battle in this game 29-18, or basically 30-18 if you're rounding up/down. But he didn't necessarily outperform Dario on just a straight production level. Taj had 7 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. Dario had 9 and 6 against the other team's opposing bench units. I think the argument to be made for why Taj maybe had a worse line overall was the fact that he had 3 turnovers, unusual for Gibson. But we're watching the minutes. That's the thing that you really want to take away. And if you look at one guy's minutes, you basically know what the other guys had. Minnesota has been with Robert Covington for about, I guess it's a week and a half, 2 weeks at this point now. And it's been a little bit of an unusual ride, right? I think the first game was the first game that win over Brooklyn. Double check on that one. They didn't have Jimmy Butler yet in that one, but I also don't think Covington was in town yet. I'm pretty sure he joined the team. If memory serves, Robert Covington and Dario Saric joined the team on a Wednesday. So looking back at this, what would that be? Not the 20th, the 13th, the 14th? I think it would be the 14th against New Orleans. So Wednesday 2 weeks ago. And yes, hooray for Dan's memory. I just remember them clearing a medical exam on a Tuesday, and it was like, oh, they're expected to make their debut on Wednesday. So on that Wednesday, Minnesota 107-100 win over the sub-500 New Orleans Pelicans. The position battle was won by Taj Gibson. The next 3 games in a row, Dario won the position battle. Gibson played fewer minutes, 21, 19, and 19 in those 3 after 28 against the Pelicans. The last 3, Taj has played more minutes than Saric, 26, 23, where neither one of them actually racked up a ton of minutes, and then 30 against the Cavaliers. Notable, by the way, because this is the most minutes that Taj has played since Saric joined the team. So I can't necessarily say that it's trending up, per se, because his production hasn't really changed a whole lot even when he was playing a few more minutes. He had that big game in Brooklyn where Taj had 16 and 11 with 3 steals and a block on, 7 out of 8 shooting, 8 out of 9, 6 out of 7 maybe? I think it was 6 out of 7 shooting in that game. And no turnovers, which is more the MO for him. With Karl Anthony Towns sort of busting loose, especially on the glass, and Rob Covington being a solid rebounder, although Jimmy Butler was as well, I don't know that there's quite the 7 rebounds a game for Taj that he was enjoying before the trade. But the last 3, and this to me is sort of a big deal, the last 3, Tibbs has gone to his guy. And maybe most importantly, it's been 7 games with the new situation. The Timberwolves are 5-2 in those 7 games. And the 2 losses came when Taj played fewer minutes than Dario Saric. I don't know if there's a 1-to-1 correlation there. In fact, I would argue vehemently that there's not. But Tom Thibodeau, who, by the way, I was listening to a broadcast, Tom Thibodeau is the correct pronunciation of his last name. He got the nickname Tibbs when teams didn't know how to pronounce his last name, and the players started calling him Tibbs because they thought his name was Tom Thibodeau. It's Thibodeau, so his nickname should actually be Thibs. He probably convinced himself that it was Dario's fault. That's the type of crap he pulls. I have no dog in this fight. I have Taj Gibson on one fantasy team. I have Dario Saric on none. So it's not like I'm heavily invested in either side. I'm watching it on a night-to-night basis with you guys, trying to determine which way this thing is going to swing. The reason I think it's going to swing is that Thibodeau just has a history of swinging things. There are a lot of head coaches out there who have a rich, storied, and very frustrating history of time-sharing. In the Poconos, time-sharing their guys. Tom Thibodeau is not one of those head coaches. He has a rich history of just piling minutes on his starting 5. Picking his guys, picking his horses, saddling up, and just riding until the poor horse breaks down. And Taj, to his unbelievable credit, hasn't broken down in all these years of getting ridden by Tom Thibodeau. It's a terrible mental image, but it's in there now. When Taj has played more minutes, which is now 4 of the 7 games, they're 4-0. When Saric has played more minutes in 3 of those 7 games, they're 1-2. What does it mean? Squat to all of us. But to Thibodeau, what does it mean? It might mean Taj is still my guy. This is why I said don't drop anybody, because this situation was fluid when it started. I saw a lot of websites out there that were advising drops on these guys. And I'm thinking, no, if any one of these dudes takes over a 30-minute role, they're a fantasy asset again, especially Taj, because his game translates better than Saric, even without 3-pointers, because Gibson gets steals and blocks, doesn't turn the ball over, rebounds, and shoots at a high percentage. Classic big man. 9-cat big man. If he wins this position battle, he should then go back to being owned everywhere. He's only owned in 50% of leagues right now. People panic real quick in the NBA. That game against New Orleans was 13 days ago, and he played well. So I don't think people dropped him after that one. I think people dropped him after the Memphis game, where he had 5 and 5. That was the 18th. That's 9 days ago, guys. Sometimes you just have to convince yourself to wait 9 days to figure out how something turns out. And we still don't know, but it does look like it's starting to move a little bit in the direction of Taj. We will keep an eye on it. It will be monitored. Over on the Cleveland side, the weirdness continued as Kyle Korver busted loose for 6 3-pointers. Of course, he's hoping to be traded, so we're not going to put any stock in that. With Sam Decker and David Nwaba both on the shelf, Larry Nance Jr. got a much-anticipated start and delivered. 12 points, 8 boards, 7 assists, a steal, 2 blocks, 5 out of 10 shooting, and 2 for 2 from the free throw line. That is what we were hoping for with old Larry Nance Jr. this year. Get in there and let him go. Problem is, and he should be owned, by the way, as long as both Nwaba and Decker are out. He's a fantastic streaming option. Problem is, he might end up just being that, a streaming option. He's owned in most leagues, 61%, so I'm not going to talk about him like he's a traditional waiver wire guy. He is a top 115 fantasy asset in 22 minutes a game, which is basically what we were talking about. He's a 24 to 25-minute guy, and he's a top 100 player. We had the hope that he might get up to 28, 29 minutes a night and crack that top 80. That looks like a pipe dream if the Cavs have any of their other power forwards healthy, meaning Decker and then lately somehow Nwaba, who's playing the 4 for this team at times. Tristan Thompson coasting along at the center position. He is unchallenged there, at least until Kevin Love comes back. Other notes on this ball game: Colin Sexton passed a little bit, but then just was terrible from the field. He shot 19 times on his way to just 11 points. That's rough. And we've talked about the fact that Colin Sexton has a very poor fantasy stat set. He's struggling to find his way inside the top 150. Everybody's going gaga over him. And it's just points. Literally all he's doing right now is scoring points. He had 23 and 29 points in his last 2 games, and he's not even close to cracking the top 100 over the last week. Because he has 9 turnovers in that stretch, 1 3-pointer, 1 steal, and 1 block, combined over 3 games. Fantasy is about more than just one category, friends. I don't know what's going to happen when George Hill comes back, because it actually sounds like he's not that far off. Chetty Osman, 12 shots, 8 points. Same problem he's been running into all season long. I don't know that he's ever going to be efficient enough to be owned. I know they want to get him opportunity, but he's just not that good yet. The guy that jumped out in this game to me was Rodney Hood. And that's a couple times now in the last week. He's started to assert himself a little bit more. In fact, you look at Rodney Hood's game log from this season, and he took 16 shots in yesterday's game. He took 20 shots over the weekend in their win in Philadelphia. Those are the 2 most shots he's taken in any game all season long. 2 of the last 3 games he has set, I can't say season highs because they came in the wrong order, but 2 of his top 2. His top 2 efforts have come in the last 3 games. Prior to that, he did have a 15-shot game in Chicago, which shouldn't surprise anybody. Chicago lets everybody score like crazy, and had a 13-shot game where he scored 26 points against Atlanta. So you're looking at some of the worst defenses in the NBA, and those are the ones where Hood decided he was going to try to do some stuff. Philly, that's a good team. Minnesota, not a good necessarily, but a decent team. Better now that they solved the Jimmy Butler stuff. So 25 and 20 points in those 2 games. The rest of his fantasy game is severely lacking, but he does have 7 threes in those 2 ball games. He's a good foul shooter. And if he's on the floor for 35 minutes, which is what's been the case in those 2 basketball games or more, he will eventually just bungle his way into 2 or 3 assists and 2 or 3 rebounds. So it's the same problem that you're looking at with a guy like Colin Sexton, where it's all points and very little else, but the difference with Rodney Hood is that he shoots the 3-pointer. It's why if you look at the last 7 days for Hood, he's a 135 guy, and if you look at the last 7 days for Colin Sexton, he's a 218 rank in 9-cat. That's the difference the 3-pointer can make. Rodney Hood ranked not higher because of that dud in between the high-scoring games, but it's something to keep a very close watch on. They need him to be a scorer. They need him to be the guy that takes the most shots on the team while Kevin Love is out. He has to. They're not going to win if he's being passive, because the rest of these guys are not that good. He's not that good, but at least he can shoot. So I don't think he's a pickup yet. He's only owned in 25% of leagues, so he's going to be available in quite a few spots for you guys. But if you're looking for somebody that can gun down some threes and make some free throws, maybe there's a world where that settles in. I'll tell you what, if he has a good first half in Oklahoma City, I might grab him at that moment. Maybe this is just a guy who's figuring out his role with the team. It takes time. I'm not that excited about it, but I am watching it. I think I put him in my my watch category in the tweet storm from last night. Thank you again, everybody, for making those so well trafficked. It's pretty cool. Houston, Washington had a couple of things to keep an eye on. The 3-and-D battle in Houston, P.J. Tucker easily winning it. James Ennis was actually okay in yesterday's game in 31 minutes. He had 10 points, a 3 and 2 steals. But P.J. had a 3 and 4 steals, also 12 rebounds, 3 assists. He's just out in front in that battle. I know it was an overtime game, but P.J.'s in a good spot, and James Ennis is very fringy. Washington. So we talked about Kelly Oubre and Markieff Morris on yesterday's podcast, and only one of those two guys was good in that ballgame, and it was Keefe, who looks like a new man coming off the bench. A little bump in his usage, a little not having to try to do stuff with Bradley Beal and John Wall on the floor with him, and he's ready to roll. Now, he's not going to shoot 8 for 12 every night. 22 and 10 with 3 threes and 2 steals is probably the high water mark for Keefe this year. But he's better right now, and Washington's won a few games in a row, so they're just going to keep rolling with it. The disappointment of this game was obviously Kelly Oubre, who lost a lot of his minutes in this one to Jeff Green when they went medium-large for stretches. And somehow, I just don't know how this keeps happening, Oubre got into foul trouble again. He picked up 3 fouls in 11 first-half minutes. He did play 8.5 minutes of the third quarter, but did nothing with them. And it's hard right now to justify a hold. But here's the argument for it. The argument for the hold is that in the last game he played 23 minutes, had 2 threes, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. He can get steals, block shots, and hit 3-pointers. That is a rare combination. And he's generally more involved in the offense than he was last night. That was a little bit of an anomaly. He's usually more aggressive, but you saw a ton of Wall and Beal in this basketball game. Wall took 23 shots, Beal took 18. Otto Porter even managed to get his 11. Unusual to see Oubre stuck with only 7 shots. But again, minutes were lower, and he just never looked quite right. So I'm hanging with it. Dwight Howard's return is eventually going to put a little bit of a squeeze on Markieff because he logged a bunch of minutes at the center spot yesterday. The openings in Washington are likely to come at smaller places on the floor. Otto Porter, who's generally a small forward but has been sliding up to play some power forward lately, if he gets traded, do you see a ton of Dwight Markieff lineups? That might be a little bit large for Washington. If they slide guys up a spot, then you see more Kelly Oubre. If Bradley Beal gets moved, you see more Kelly Oubre. There's just too many ways for him to actually be involved. If he goes out there and puts up another 3-3 or 4-4 game the next time out, I give you full permission to move on from him and just try to be first to the wire if a trade goes down. But I do think there's something in the chamber, and I think he'll show it at some point over the next 2 games. That's the leash that I'm giving to Kelly Oubre right now. He's got to do something good in the next 2 games because you can't alternate really good and truly awful games. It just doesn't balance out quite right. You need 2 good ones for every 1 bad one. Preferably you'd have more than that, but anyway. Marvin Williams, next man on the docket. Old man Marv coming in clutch. 37 minutes, 16 points, 8 rebounds, a steal, 4 3-pointers. Guys, he's been good lately. The darndest thing. He's number 124 on the season now after this recent 2-week hot stretch where Marvin Williams has been a top 80 fantasy player. And I know most of it has come because Michael Kidd-Gilchrist was out. MKG came back in yesterday's game. He played 18 minutes off the bench. And this gives me a whole lot of pause. A whole lot of pause. Listen, you guys know I love Marvin Williams maybe more than anyone. Possibly more than anybody. Old man Marv, I remember that 9-cat run he went on 2 years ago in February and March. It was magnifique. It was amazing. I'm tempted to look it up just so that I can salivate while I do the podcast. It was basically February, late January to mid-March or so, before I think the Hornets threw in the towel that year. He was going nuts. And I remember I was trying to hold off the team that had him in a roto league, and I don't know that I actually did. Marvin had games of 27 and 10, 13 and 18. Twice he grabbed 18 rebounds in that stretch. He was a rebounding, passing maniac. And it was basically because he was playing minutes. He was seeing 32, 36, 38, 34, 33 minutes in those games. It all comes down to minutes because he's never going to be a big-time scoring guy. You don't want him taking 20 shots a game. It just doesn't make sense. Even if he's out there for 38 minutes, he's still going to be sitting between 7 and 11 shots every single night. The problem lately this year has been, up until basically the injury to Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, he hasn't been seeing 30 minutes a game. He got 30 minutes on October 20th, and he posted 13.6 boards, 3 blocks, and 2 3-pointers. It was awesome. He saw 33 minutes on the 24th. He had 11 and 8 with 2 steals, a block, and a 3-pointer. I mean, there's a cutoff here, and it's a pretty obvious one. He's played 30 minutes in each of the last 3 games, and in that stretch, he had 10 and 6 with 2 threes and a steal, 20 and 13 with 4 3-pointers, and then yesterday, 16 and 8 with a steal and 4 3-pointers. When he hits the 30-minute mark, he's given you 3 to 5 cash stats every ball game. When he doesn't, he doesn't. It's simple as that. You could even put the cutoff at like 27 minutes if you wanted to really dial in on this season, because there are 2 games that he played over 27 minutes that we didn't count in the mix, and in those he had 10 and 4 with 2 steals and 3 3-pointers, and he had 8 and 2, not great, but 2 3-pointers, 3 steals, and a block. Do we think he can hold 30 minutes going forward? That's the question, and I honestly don't have a great answer because Michael Kidd-Gilchrist actually looked pretty good in his 17 minutes last night, and one has to assume that those 17 will become 20 or 22, and those are going to come from Marvin. There were stretches yesterday where they sort of got away with playing Marvin and MKG as hybrid 3s and 4s, and maybe it worked because Milwaukee plays Giannis at the 3/4, so you can sort of use MKG wherever he is, and then you could throw Marvin Williams on him for times, and you could potentially use MKG on Chris Middleton. There isn't like a little guy that's going to blow past them. Milwaukee's actually a relatively large team by all accounts. So maybe that's why it worked better yesterday. Perhaps that's why MKG got 18 minutes and Marvin still got his 37. It's not entirely clear. Frank Kaminsky's minutes went back down. Cody Zeller played very little in yesterday's game. So did we see Marvin at the 5? Dealing with a guy like Brook Lopez? That should have been exposed. I guess that's what we're looking at right now. I can't imagine that they can get away with that on a nightly basis. And so I have to believe that these numbers come down for old man Marv. But I'll tell you what, there aren't that many guys out there on the waiver wire that have actually had 3-month stretches of a year of top 50 production, and Marvin Williams did it 2 years ago. What was his actual final rank that year? That I don't know. There we go. He was number 69 that year. And that was, by the way, after a very slow start. He went crazy in the second half. 1.6 3-pointers, 0.8 steals, 0.7 blocks, less than a turnover a game, and 11 and almost 7 rebounds a night. Top 70 does not grow on trees, ladies and gentlemen. It's in the tank, and he just has to find a way to 30 minutes. It all comes down to that one stat. Can Marvin play 28 or more minutes? Remember I just said he was number 69 2 years ago in 30 minutes? Over the last 2 weeks, he's playing 29 and a half minutes, and he's number 79 in 9-cat. He's a pretty easy guy to predict. The problem is, predicting whether or not he's going to play is a very different bird. But listen, they play again tomorrow against Atlanta. I'd be pretty surprised if anybody in your leagues actually picked him up between now and then. Maybe they do. Maybe they're listening to this podcast. If it looks like he's going to clear 28 minutes in that game against Atlanta, I think you make the move. To me, that says that he's confident and they're trying to find a way to get him into the lineup. I don't know that he makes a big difference for them win-loss situation. I mean, they have not been better or worse markedly with MKG in or out. MKG also gets hurt a lot. Something to watch, guys. There's a world where this makes a lot of sense. Is it this world? I don't know. Skipping right over Boston, New Orleans, although good for the Celtics, thinning the herd a little bit. Jaylen Brown getting hurt, meaning other guys actually get to solidify their roles a tiny. San Antonio, Chicago, really not a lot there either. Jabari Parker does appear to be a viable streaming option until the Cavalry returns, which is right around the corner. Markkanen expected to play by next week. Chris Dunn and Bobby Portis, I think, expected to play by either late next week or the week after that. Finally. And no, you're not moving on Justin Holiday. There's no competition really for small forward minutes because he's simply better than Jabari Parker, and that's sort of the only guy that could push him. Justin Holiday's been too good. He's been a pillar of efficiency so far this year. His ranking is nuts. Absolutely, positively insane on the season. He's number 32, guys. Yesterday's game actually moved him down a tiny bit. I mean, it boggles the mind. He's number 32. He's one spot behind his brother, the superstar Holiday. No, you're not moving him. Indiana, Utah. Utah, of course, coming home on that altitude back-to-back. We told you guys that was going to be an ugly one, and it was. Woof. It's really hard to play a game flying into altitude, coming from the West Coast. You got the 2-hour thing. It's real. I know I talk about this all the time. It's a schedule loss. I think Utah, if they could have, they would have gone to the local newspapers and TV stations and said, look, guys, we're basically going to give this one. We're just going to hand this one to Indiana because we're exhausted, and it's better to just take a loss than to have somebody get hurt because we're already dinged up, and we can't afford to lose anybody else. So nobody got to play a ton of minutes. Joe Ingles actually survived the madness with a 5-steal performance, and he's going to be great while Donovan Mitchell is out, but no idea how long that's going to be. Meanwhile, the story of the day, kind of burying the lead a little bit here, is that Darren Collison had one of the best games of the night with a usage rate of 10. You heard that right. A usage rate of 10. It is the lowest on Indiana other than the 4.5 minutes that Kyle O'Quinn played off the bench where he didn't get a shot up. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and call it the lowest on the team. 8 points, 3 rebounds, 11 assists, 4 steals on 4 out of 6 shooting. This is basically, this is better than the Darren Collison you drafted because you figured he was going to be sitting around 11 points and 5 or 6 assists. But he got steals. He did it on good percentages. He didn't take any 3-pointers, which we'll forgive him in this one. And this is why I can't bring myself to drop him. If you have the option to stick him on your bench, I still think you do so. I still think you just squat on him for a little bit longer and wait to see if somehow this thing can make some sense in Indiana. I'm not sure that it ever will because Corey Joseph continues to play well off the bench. He saw 27 minutes in this blowout, had a steal and 3 3-pointers. He's been very good for them, and we all thought it was going to be Tyreek Evans pushing Collison, but it's Joseph. It's Corey Joseph just getting a bigger role this year. But this is sort of like, it parallels the Miles Turner stuff that I mentioned just a few moments ago. It doesn't take that many games to shift things dramatically. Miles Turner had one good game and went from number 100 to number 85. He's a top 85 guy now. One game is all it took. And it wasn't like it blew the roof off either. It was a good game. It wasn't even a great one. 16, 4, and 4 with 2 steals and 2 blocks. No 3-pointers. He had 3 turnovers. He still missed a free throw. One game, he jumped 15 spots, and it was only a good game. What if Miles Turner goes out in one of these and posts one of those crazy, 20-10 burgers with 4 blocks, and he does it on, what would that have to be? Like 8 out of 12 shooting with a couple of 3-pointers and 2 for 2 at the free throw line. If he has one game like that, he could jump from number 85 to number 70, probably overnight. Darren Collison is in a very similar boat. When you're in this sort of clunky chunk, when you're in this 16-team territory, which is basically what Collison is right now, he's 14, 16-teamer. He went from number 155 to 138 with one good game. 17 spots, and it was a pretty good game. He had a lot of assists and a bunch of steals, but otherwise, didn't score. Didn't make any 3-pointers. Didn't take any free throws. Didn't have any turnovers, so that was good, I guess. He is literally one good week away from being a top 100 guy. And this is why you can't bail on that, because you just know it's in the tank. On the other hand, and this one pains me to say it, I don't think Thad Young is coming around this year. In watching the way that the offense operates, he's not a part of it. He's in a different boat because he doesn't have the opportunity. Darren Collison has the opportunity to handle the basketball often. It doesn't take much for him because he's a good percentages guy. A 3-ball, low turnovers, couple of assists. Darren Collison has that really nice fantasy profile where if his 44% shooting comes back up to, even close to his career mark is 47, get him up to 46. By the way, he hasn't shot worse than 46.7 was the lowest he's had in the last 7 years. So that's probably coming back. He's never had a free throw shooting year under 79%, and generally, he's a career 85er. So that's 69 this year. That's coming back up. There are these little regressions with Collison where you can look at it, you're like, okay, this guy's sitting in the top 130. Even if a lot of stuff doesn't come around, if these little things do, then he's a top 100 guy. With Thad Young, who, God love him, he was one of our saviors last year. The minutes are not as high. He's at 27. They're still coming around every once in a while, but he's down 5 minutes season over season. He played 32 minutes a game last year. He's 27 and change this season. Shots are down from 10.7 to 9.1. The field goal percent is actually higher this year than last year, so that's actually not a good sign. When you're looking for a guy to revert to a mean, you're hoping that something good happens there. He's right on his career mark. He's not taking three-pointers, really, in a way that could impact your team. His terrible foul shooting has never really been a thing, at least this later part of his career. He just doesn't get to the foul line, so it sort of doesn't matter. But the rebounds are down from 6.3 to 5.2. That you can mostly stick on the fact that he's playing 5 fewer minutes a game. The assists are down from 2 to 1.3. You can put that on the minutes. Steals are down from 1.7 to 1.4. Scoring's down from 12 to 10. These are basically all things that come with those extra 5 minutes. It's another close to 20% of his time has been taken away. If you put 20% back onto everything he's doing right now, then you basically put him at last year's numbers. And that's it. It's a minutes thing. Can Thad Young play 32 minutes a game on this iteration of the Pacers? The answer is probably not. I thought we'd get him to 29 or 30. It looks like that's not going to happen because of the development of Domantas Sabonis in particular, and the fact that this team is willing to just go small and play Bojan Bogdanovic at the 4 sometimes, or Miles Turner at the 4 sometimes. So for Thad, you're looking for an injury to Bogdanovic, Turner, or Sabonis, and then he would have a window. And we sort of saw that. Was it last week when Sabonis missed a half of basketball and Turner took a game off for an ankle thing over the weekend? I believe that was on the 23rd. And Thad had 12 and 5 with 2 steals. And he played 31 minutes. We did a minutes breakdown on Marvin Williams earlier on this podcast, and we could probably do the same thing with Thad. He had a 5 or 6 game stretch, actually, between October 22nd and November 3rd or 5th, where he was playing right around 30 minutes a game, and he still wasn't quite where you'd want him to be, but he was basically there. Just look at those games. If you don't believe me, pull them up and look at his numbers from those ones. He shoots about 50% over that stretch. He averaged closer to 12 points instead of 9. He had games in there where he went 1 and 0. We had 2 defensive stats in the first one. He had 0 defensive stats in their blowout win in San Antonio. That was sort of the anomaly. And then defensive stats from there, it was 2-0, 2-2, 8-2, 1-0, and then all of a sudden his minutes just went away. And he really hasn't played many since then other than the Miles Turner sitting game. He needs to be on the floor, and it doesn't look like he's going to get to 30. So I'm probably moving on. Sorry, Thad. If you go on a run of 30 minutes a game, you're back on my team. I'll give you the Marvin treatment. And Orlando Golden State, last note here on today's recap portion of the podcast. Jonathan Isaac played an excellent second half. He saw 30 minutes in this game, 15 points, a steal, and 3 3-pointers. The slow plod continues. I don't know that I'm starting him yet. I want to see him do 30 minutes twice before I take him off my bench. But once he's seeing 30 minutes a night, you're talking about a guy that can get you 3 defensive stats a game and knock down a 3-pointer. And that's a guy you're going to want in your lineup. Okay, I made you wait long enough. Let's figure out what the heck's going on with the Knicks and bring in today's guest, the esteemed guest. This is one I've been waiting on for a while. Not because we had to wait to schedule the thing, but just a team that I've been really anxious to talk about for quite some time, and that's the New York Knicks. Let's figure out what's going on out there. Not that I'm not genuinely excited. A lot of times, this is like an old Conan O'Brien bit, I think. Where he comes on at the beginning of the show and he's like, we got a great show for you tonight. And he goes, how many times do I actually mean that? A team that we've been talking about constantly on this show, and it's largely in a, well, we'll just wait and see what the hell rolls out tonight kind of fashion. And now we've got somebody that can shed a little bit more light on it. The team, of course, is the New York Knicks, and the man is Chris Iseman. He's the Knicks beat writer for The Record and NorthJersey.com. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.
So I bounced around in my head on where I actually want to start with this conversation because I do have a lot of questions. So I'm going to start with the old man coming off the disabled list, as it were, and that's Courtney Lee. So yeah, threw you a little curveball there. I figured we'd go almost any other direction. Does he have a role on this team when he gets healthy? Because it seems like the Knicks could use a little bit of a stabilizing force at times, but we also know that sort of contractually he's a little bit on the outs. What are the expectations from Lee when he gets back?
Well, I think that the one thing that they certainly could use is some three-point shooting, so he could provide that. We don't know how he's going to play right when he gets back, obviously, because he hasn't played all season. But it is going to be interesting to see how Fizdale juggles his role, because he obviously has a very guard-heavy roster, and it's going to be intriguing to see how he kind of carves out those minutes. I think that they're certainly going to want to see what he has, especially if they're going to want to try and find a trade for him by the deadline. So I think there's definitely going to be a role there for him. Fizdale says that he can definitely use him and that he's looking forward to having him back. It's just a matter of, finding him time. And you look at a guy like Damian Dotson, who hasn't played the last 4 games. So, how Fizdale kind of divvies up those minutes is going to be interesting to see.
Well, you gave me the proper segue there in divvying up minutes, and it's been a little bit of an adventure so far in the early going. By the way, you can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Iseman, Iseman, spelling on that last name. The minutes have shifted pretty considerably outside of Tim Hardaway Jr. He's been just hanging out in that shooting guard spot, and nobody's bugged him so far. But we've seen Frank Ntilikina play point guard, play small forward. We've seen more Emmanuel Mudiay lately. We had a short-lived Mitchell Robinson in the starting lineup experiment that seemed to result in a large chunk of personal fouls. This is why, by the way, I started with Courtney Lee, because I knew when I got into this part, I was going to go, well, I don't really even know where to begin. So let's just start big and work our way down to the little guys.
Sure.
Mitchell Robinson, Enes Kanter. You have sort of 2 different arrows in that center spot. You have the proven veteran who's a terrific rebounder and very polished around the rim. And then you have this out-of-this-world athletic young guy who's spindly and getting knocked around and picking up personal fouls and blocking 9 shots in a basketball game. How does that situation play itself out? Because Kanter also on a pretty big contract this year.
Yeah, definitely. I think, they want to develop Robinson, obviously. They like what he can bring, and it's obviously why. I mean, you just mentioned it. The shot blocking ability is ridiculous, and he has such an impact on the court when he comes into a game. It's so clear the way he alters a game defensively. He's still developing offensively, but the way he plays on the defensive end is just it's hard to beat. And obviously, Enes Kanter is not as good of a defensive player. But they each have their strengths. And right now, Enes Kanter's ability to get rebounds and get putbacks is huge. And you saw that the other day against Memphis when he had 21 points and 26 rebounds. He was getting clutch rebounds late in the game. And that's a skill that Mitchell Robinson is still sort of developing. So they each have their strengths right now. And his Cantor has been really, really coming up big for them during this 3-game winning streak. It's going to be, I think as time goes on, you need to continue to see Mitchell Robinson develop and progress. He needs to figure out this fouling issue. He's been fouling way too much, and that's just, that's a lot of that's just rookie struggles. That's something that, veterans that he plays against, knowing how to get him into fouling, knowing how to get him to foul. So it's just that's something that could be worked out. But they each have their own strengths, to him and Enes Kanter. And right now, Enes has obviously been coming up really big for them.
Chris, as you look towards the heavens and the stars align in the evening, do you have any idea when we might see that center position flip-flop? Is it just, at the whim of David Fizdale, or is there kind of a secret plan that we should be looking for?
Well, it's interesting. They're 7-14 now, so the 21 games in. David Fizdale has said that around game 25, he wants to be able to settle on a lineup, on a starting five, settle into rotation so guys can settle into their own roles and feel comfortable and get into a rhythm.
Oh, interesting.
So we're obviously pretty close to that. And right now, the way things have been going, since they have been winning, I don't necessarily see that changing anytime soon at the center position. Maybe if Mitchell continues to get better, continues to improve, and, he gets the fouling situation under control, then maybe at some point I could see him getting back into that starting lineup. But I think for the time being, Fizdale and it's the right thing to do in my opinion, but he's rolling with this lineup. So I don't necessarily see it changing right now or within the next few games, but as we've seen through these first 20-plus games, anything is possible.
Yeah, but well said. Is there, you think, like a late time stamp on it, like all-star break? Do we see, I don't want to call it the tank mode. It seems like it's more developmental mode. Is that kind of that same feeling that you get from other teams that maybe this one has going as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think, and the one thing, too, is that nothing, Fizdale said that nothing is set in stone. Everything's fluid.
Yeah.
So it could be 25 games, and then we'll get to 35 games, and he decides, let's make a change. So this team too is interesting because there's nobody, with the exception of maybe a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr. There's nobody that you look at and say, okay, this guy has to be in the starting lineup. If he's not in the starting lineup, that is a really, really bad decision. I mean, it's just kind of like nobody's at that point, really. So he's kind of taken that mode of, I have a bunch of players and I need to try and figure out where they fit, and I'm going to find the right combination. And if they're starting, they're starting. If they're coming off the bench, they're coming off the bench. It doesn't matter what they've done in years past. So I think it's going to continue to maybe evolve as the season goes on, but we'll certainly see.
Yeah, it's like taking a bunch of puzzle pieces and just throwing them at a table and seeing what order they fall in. Power forward has actually looked a little bit more solid lately in Noah Vonleh. Did you see that coming? Because I didn't.
He was impressive early on in training camp, and he just is a really, really versatile player. And now lately he's been knocking down threes. The one thing, teams are starting to, Memphis the other day, they started to guard him more on the three-point line, so that's an adjustment that he's going to have to make. That wasn't, teams weren't getting out to him, he had a really good stretch of games where he was knocking them down pretty consistently, but teams weren't really respecting that part of his game just yet. Now they are, and they're going out to defend him, so that's going to be an adjustment he has to make. But I'll tell you what, he has been really, really solid through the first 21 games. He defends well. He's an active player. He has really, really responded to the role that David Fizdale has given him. And, he's really just he's come a long way. I mean, the other day, Fizdale said that he might be the team's most complete player, which, is pretty amazing because it's obviously, a guy like Noah Vonleh, you might not think that would be the case. But when you really look at it, it kind of makes sense. The free throw shooting does need to get better, but for the most part, he's been a really, really solid player and giving them consistency at that position.
Yeah, career highs basically across the board to this point in the season. The one that really jumps out is the fact that he's getting steals and blocking shots this year. He's sort of never done that in the past, and that has to be a breath of fresh air for Knicks fans. Okay, now getting into the really weird stuff, and that is the revolving doors at small forward and point guard. And we've seen a little bit of Kevin Knox. We've seen a little bit of Frank Ntilikina. We've seen some Trey Burke at point. We've seen Ntilikina at point. We've seen seen Emmanuel Mudiay at point. You said this, there's days where there's no clear starter. So is this similar to the center position battle, or is this one even more fluid because there are just sort of more combinations of guys you can use at two different spots? Oh, well, Mario Hezonja. I didn't even bring up Mario Hezonja.
Yeah.
He's looked flat out terrible.
he's been struggling. There's no question. But, I mean, if you look at the point guard spot, right now, Emmanuel Mudiay is kind of like taking that position and saying, hey, look, I should be the guy who starts here. And Fizdale was asked a few games ago, do you foresee Emmanuel Mudiay starting the rest of the season? And he said, well, he's going to, he'll tell me that. He'll tell me by the way he plays whether or not he deserves that role. And lately, he's certainly playing well enough to deserve that role. Fizz has said all season that he likes the way he runs the offense. He pushes the pace. He says that he's the team's best passer. And then lately, he's just been, scoring 27 points a game against New Orleans, 17 the other night with that ferocious dunk over Garrett Temple in Memphis. So he's been playing really, really well. And I think, they like, what Trey Burke brings too with his scoring ability. In the Ntilikina situation, I think that they just aren't. The Ntilikina point guard situation is going to be something that we might be talking about forever because it just doesn't seem it's the same thing that we were going through last year. Where is he a point guard? Is he not a point guard? And I still think that in some ways they're trying to figure that out. He obviously has not spent a tremendous amount of time at that position last year in the grand scheme, or this year in the grand scheme of the season. But I think that right now they like what Emmanuel Mudiay is doing, and for good reason.
Now Knox is probably the last guy I'm going to bug you about, and next time I get you on the pod, we'll get into Trier and Dodson and the guys who are kind of like, wait, who? Kevin Knox. This was a guy that did draw some hype during Summer League. It's been a little bit of a mixed bag. The injury obviously sort of slowing him through the early going. It's been a lot of shooting for him on the floor in games that I've watched and not a ton else to this point. Is that why his minutes have trended down just while he kind of firms up other parts of his game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he definitely he's shown flashes of what he can do. It just hasn't been able to do it consistently. It's interesting. In the summer, he was going to the basket a lot more, and he hasn't been doing that a lot this year. He's been mostly out on the three-point line. Kind of been catch and shoot situations. He hasn't been knocking down threes consistently. Defensively, he's still learning. I've been reluctant to really criticize him too much because he's 19 years old and he's 20 plus games less than that. He's about 14 games into his first NBA season. So, I think he just needs time to develop and time to grow. And I think he'll get there. Like I said, he's shown flashes of really good things. But he's just, until he kind of gets some consistency going and starts to really learn how to play at this level, his minutes are kind of going to fluctuate, I think, depending on how he's going.
I lied to you on the Trey Burke front. I do want to ask one more question about Burke, and that's just this sort of hot and cold with him. Is that just his MO? He's a guy that runs really hot and then really cold for stretches, and his minutes are going to reflect that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, he's had a couple DNPs this season, so Fizz always says he's in the holster. I trust him. He's just got to be ready to come off the bench and give us, what we need out of him. But that's going to be him. He's always going to provide a scoring punch. But he's definitely going to be, at times, he's going to be an up and down guy. But he's come up big for them this season too. So they've been pleased, I think, for the most part.
And easily the hardest question I'm going to ask you on today's podcast. The Knicks have won 3 in a row. How far can they go? 4 in a row? 5 in a row?
They got Detroit's good. They're going to have a tough time tonight, and I think they've got, obviously Philly's going to give them a tough time tomorrow. So stretching it to 4 is going to be tough. I certainly don't think it will go to 5, but you know what? You never know. I didn't think that they were going to beat Boston or New Orleans or necessarily Memphis either. So
yeah, there you go. The New York Knicks, a little light shining in a dark corner of the NBA. We've got a better idea of what's going on out there. Chris, thank you so much for carving out time for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on.
He is Chris Iseman. He's the Knicks beat writer for The Record and NorthJersey.com. You can follow him, and you should, on Twitter, at Chris Iseman. Check him out right now. Thanks again, my man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I'll tell you what, that was a long time coming. Not that gentleman in particular. Massive thank you to Chris again for popping on the show, but just talking to anybody about what's going on with the New York Knicks right now. It's crazy out there. We went over it. Courtney Lee and Mitchell Robinson and Enes Kanter and Kevin Knox and the rotating cavalry of guards around Tim Hardaway Jr. It's just nice to get any kind of clarity on that. I don't think everything's ever going to be completely clear, but even inching in that direction gives us a little bit of an idea of what we can expect going forward from that Knicks situation. We'll just call it a situation. Wrapping things up here on the podcast, I want to take a look at a short Tuesday card. It's only 5 games coming up tonight, which is a little bit of a breather before we get into a medium/large size Wednesday. What's medium-large? I know small medium is smedium. Medium large is large. Anyway, we'll wrap things back up on that front tomorrow. 5 games tonight. New York is in Detroit. The Knicks, the aforementioned Knicks, are catching 7.5 points in Motown. Miami, 7.5 point favorites at home. Same number. They're hosting the Atlanta Hawks. Toronto, 5-point road favorites against the Memphis Grizzlies. That should be a good ball game. 2 of the best teams, 2 of the best defensive teams and 2 of the best teams in the NBA by record so far, going head-to-head. Indiana is on a regular elevation back-to-back after beating the daylights out of the Utah Jazz last night. Utah, of course, in a terrible scheduling spot, as we mentioned on yesterday's podcast. It is not exclusive to the road teams when you're going into altitude. Utah got that easy blowout win over Sacramento and then had to lose an hour flying home. Even if you're used to it, sometimes it catches up to you a little. That altitude back-to-back, losing an hour with a 2-hour flight is not a joke. Remember, Toronto beat that angle in the very first time it popped up this year, but I think it's now 3-0 since then. So, again, it doesn't happen very often. We're a quarter of the way through the season. We've only had 4 of them pop up so far, but you're 3-1 if you bet all 4. That's an angle that just works. The NBA is attempting to eliminate some of those altitude back-to-backs, but it didn't get all of them. So there. Ha-ha. Anyway, Indiana is a 2.5-point road favorite in Phoenix. I know that number looks weird, but remember, they don't have Victor Oladipo. They're also on a back-to-back. Phoenix is rested for this game and at full strength. The Lakers are in Denver. Denver, a 3.5-point home favorite. Lakers and Nuggets. This is not the first time they've met this season. In fact, it was arguably the Lakers' signature win in the month of October when things were not going so great. All these new pieces getting jammed together. Lakers beat the Nuggets 121-114 in L.A. on the second half of a Phoenix home back-to-back. That was a nice win for the Lakers. You got to believe the Nuggets didn't forget about it. Of course, the question mark here is, Lakers have LeBron. They're really outside of that game in Orlando and the game at home against the Toronto Raptors. The Lakers have looked really good and competitive in every single ball game. They're going to be a very difficult team the rest of the way to bet against if they're catching points. If they're laying points, it's a different story. I think the story that you got to look for with the Lakers right now, and we'll just quickly go through the month of November, and it'll give you kind of an indicator. 4-point disparity in their win in Portland on the 3rd of this month. And we'll just go through this pretty quick because there's something to be learned from it. They lost at home by 14 to Toronto, but that was like a 30-point game most of the way. 4-point game with Minnesota, 15-point game in Sacramento, 1-point game with Atlanta, 11 against Portland. That was a game that opened up late. They lost by 13 in Orlando. They won by 16 in Miami, 4-point win in Cleveland, 7-point win with Utah, 4-point game with Orlando. All of these games are close, and then they separate by some X number of points at the last minute. So if you can find a game where the Lakers are either laying a big number or catching a big number, you basically want to take the dog in those games because it's going to be competitive. And, outside of, again, we could throw away the Toronto game and the Orlando game where the Lakers were just not competitive. In the other ones, they've been close basically the whole way through. Orlando and the Lakers traded leads. Lakers were out in front of Utah basically the whole game, but of course it ended up as a 7-point game. So you're looking for that, somewhere in that number, like a 7. If you can find a 7 or bigger, it's very hard to turn a game that's a one-possession game into an 8 or 9-point win at the closing buzzer. It's not hard at all to turn a one-possession game into a 6 or 7-point game. A couple of missed threes, a couple of made free throws. Lakers can't hit free throws, so that also makes it difficult for them to separate themselves over the last 1 to 2 minutes of a basketball game, of a close one. Teams can just send them to the line, and the Lakers will make 1 out of 2. But this is not one of those games. We got off on a little bit of a betting tangent. Lakers are only catching 3.5, so I do have a very slight lean to the Denver side, but not enough to make a thing of it. From a fantasy standpoint, we're obviously watching the Knicks. That's the big homework assignment here, especially after talking to Chris about the Knicks. We're watching the Heat to see what the hell is going on out there. Who actually gets the minutes in this basketball game? Does it go back to Adebayo? Does it stick with Whiteside as a starter? Hassan shouldn't, knock on something, have foul issues against the Atlanta Hawks. They're not exactly dominating teams in the paint this year with Alex Len and or Dwayne Dedmon, but you never know. Atlanta, do they stick with this new configuration of Kent Bazemore leading the second unit? And if so, is that actually a good thing to get him away from Trae Young? Toronto-Memphis, not a whole lot of storylines in that basketball game. Indiana-Phoenix, yeah, always something there. Mikal Bridges, we're watching to see if he can settle in, get a little usage under his belt in that starting unit. Indiana, we got a big game out of Darren Collison. Can he do it again? He's still glued to my bench, guys. I'm not changing my tune based on one game, although certainly a game against Phoenix is a good time to get fat. Miles Turner played pretty well in yesterday's basketball game, and that's exactly what we're talking about in the Miles Turner front. It's not going to take much for him to turn a corner. 16 points. He did it on 8 shots. That's a big, big deal. He still missed a couple of free throws, but one good game yesterday, guys, raised his season shooting from 46.5% to 48%, and he went from the number 100 player to the number 85. One game, he moved 15 slots. This is precisely what we were talking about on yesterday's podcast. He's 2 more of those from being a top 60 guy. Insanity, right? It's the truth. And then Lakers-Denver, basically we're keeping an eye on KCP. He's been playing well with Rondo out and seeing if that continues. Tomorrow on the podcast, we will talk to our old pal, Adrian Benjamins. That's right, former co-host here on Fantasy NBA Today. We'll be back to pay us a visit, give us an update on how box score breakdown is going, and the first month and change of the NBA season, what he's learned as we do a little bit of a trade profile on that podcast tomorrow. What is tomorrow? Tomorrow is Wednesday. Might have a new guest lined up for Thursday. If not, we may turn that into a mailbag show. And then, of course, Friday Live with Aaron Brewski. We'll do that one on YouTube, and you'll also get an hour of it. An hour chunk of the live show will come to you here via the traditional podcast channels. Thanks again to Chris Iseman. I'm Dan Besbris, at Dan Besbris on Twitter. If you have a moment, please do rate and review the podcast. We appreciate all your feedback, especially the positive stuff. Wink, wink. Nod, nod. Subscribe to the show if you haven't already. Have a lovely Tuesday. Short NBA card. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.